I think it's a privilege in many ways for people to be able to be founders and entrepreneurs because there's so many different scenarios, right? Some right, some wrong, but it's like again, maybe you were at the end of the day, right? We all have to, pay rent, pay a mortgage, put food on the table, put a roof over the heads, and do these things. And most founders, right, for the first early years, don't get a chance to pay themselves, right, or paying themselves very little, and it is tough to be able to walk away from a very comfortable salary, right, with benefits and things like that.
All right, Brian Lee, it's so nice to finally meet you today. I feel like this is going to be a very exciting episode. I love your energy already, but before we get too excited, I want you to introduce yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Christy. And it's funny, right? I feel like we initially made contact, well, at least what felt like a year or two ago through
Right.
LinkedIn. It's always nice how, these things kind of come together after just keeping in touch and everything else. So, yeah, very quick background about myself. The current founder of Gildre and then Roamli. Have a few other different businesses, but throughout my career, didn't necessarily follow that entrepreneurial path. Was very much in the corporate space in CPG for the first really decade of my career, and still in the product space, which gave me a lot of principles and tools to help me, ideally work on that from the product side within startups. And through that was really more focused on Roamli for the past 8 years, Gilder since 2023. Happy to talk more about it at different points, but figured, no need to kind of go into everything off the bat. But yeah, a lot of my career has kind of spanned within community, within B2B SaaS, within ed tech and CPG. So try to, enable a lot of those principles in the work that I do each day, and then how I work and support founders as well.
That's pretty cool. So, um, what what is Gilder and what is Romley? What do they do?
Yeah. So with Roamli, that was really our first main, tech-enabled startup. Me and my co-founder Bonnie Sergevich, who we initially got our start actually opening escape rooms throughout the U.S. And so with Roamli, it initially started as a tool somewhat similar to like a TripAdvisor, Get Your Guide, but the idea being if you're going to another city, whether it's 2 hours for work and just have a layover, or you're spending a full week somewhere, how do you find the things that the locals do versus a lot of the touristy SEO driven type things. And a lot of people that, at least how we felt when we travel, yes, it's of course it's important to see the big historic things, but again, you want to feel like you can really adapt to the culture or immerse yourself in the environment of that city. And aside from kind of scrolling through countless travel blogs or just kind of spending hours of research, there really wasn't a great way that we figured how to do that. And this is back in 2015. So by the time we launched in 2017 to really tackle that, was firmly entrenched in kind of creating these really unique tours, from like your haunted spooky tours in Chicago to like different scavenger hunts and things like that. And really through the pandemic, that changed a lot of how we operated
I'm
and how we
sure.
serviced our users. So that really became, how do we now work with tourism boards and chambers of commerce, different types of groups that were also so heavily impacted by the pandemic, to bring people back in. And now 8 years later, that's still our model here today. And through that gave me the chance to work at an accelerator as their head of product, to be able to meet a lot of other founders in different industries, building very unique products, but seeing a lot of similar pain points. And that's what helped us pivot, and or not pivot really, and helped us launch Gilder in 2023 once the accelerator closed up, and understanding, hey, what are the different opportunity areas that founders typically need support in, right? Because there's no shortage of incubators and communities and other groups out there, but we always found that they were just very fragmented. And so for Gilders, how do we build something for what we call that middle 98% of founders that really value two-way learning, that understand it doesn't matter if you've been in it for 40 years or 4 years, but everyone's got something to contribute through successes and certainly most importantly failures. So really putting that group together almost as like your personal advisory board, and finding people to build together and help uplift one another through that journey, since we know the entrepreneurial journey is certainly a roller coaster in many ways.
That's pretty cool. So you launch Gilder in 2023. So that
Yep.
was after the pandemic, right?
Mhm.
So, and you are now surrounded by a lot of founders because you have a community of founders and also, maybe entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
maybe coaches, as well. So what challenges did you encounter when you were trying to build that kind of community or maybe Gilder as a whole?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is always come down to a lot of the founders we service or really support are it's a mixture of your traditional product-based founder and then also your service-based founder. Those that have your SaaS platform, your consumer tech apps, and those that are also building venture studios or agencies, consultancies, everything like that. And a lot of what it comes down to, I think for every founder, and I think why I was, happy to join you on this conversation on your podcast is like
Mm-hmm.
there's only so many hours in the day that not just founders have, that humans have. And for founders, it's always time and money. Those are kind of the two big things that influence probably 99 decision or percent of the decisions that founders make. And so for us, it was always how do we, as we wanted to be very white glove, very involved and not necessarily hand holding, right? But we wanted to know and support our founders in that sense, right? Instead of a more passive, like, here's all the resources, go have fun, right? We wanted to very much be an active part of that. And for myself and my two other co-founders, it's just that wasn't feasible, right? You can't meet with as much as we'd like to, right? You can't meet with 300 founders every single week, in addition
Right.
to right putting together programming and content and things like that. So that's always the tough part. It's like, how do you balance that? And I think especially as you scale, like any founder, right, especially for a service kind of mixed platform, like you can bring on more partners, you can hire consultants, you can hire community managers, which hopefully will do a phenomenal job, right? And we have a phenomenal community manager here as well. But a lot of it just comes down to how do you balance that time? And I think that for Gilder has been the biggest thing because while this is all what we spend full time on, I also mentor for Founder Institute and I'm an entrepreneur residence for Watson Institute out in Boulder. And so, like, I want to make sure that I'm still being able to kind of give back and spend my time where I can while
Right.
not neglecting, right, our and the core business of what we do at Gilder and supporting founders. So I think
Right.
trying to find a way to balance the time and what you initially set out to offer and that value is the tougher part that we noticed when launching Gilder.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense. And so you have Gilder and you have Roamli and you know, y- just having two companies, I mean, even just having one company, there's a lot of things that um that's too many moving pieces in a bit in just one business, right? Now that you
Sure.
have two, you doubled your stress, by having two businesses, but you also double your fulfillment, because us business owners, right, when we have ideas, we really want to implement them. If not, then we won't be able to sleep at night, and we like challenges, and I hate to say it, sometimes we like stress or we're ready for stress because we know that in everything we do, stress is inevitable. So in your case, while you're, building products or features, how were you able to scale or, just like you said, balance your time? Because are you a family man? Because I know you mentioned that you have your wife, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Had a wife, and when we launched Gilder, was not a father at that time. Now we have a beautiful 15-month-old daughter, and so she's
uh
been great. And so yeah, and definitely that was the other fun part, right? Because I talk to founders that have many many kids and are in their 40s and 50s and beyond, and then I talk to founders who want that at some point in their lives, and it's like how do you balance everything? And I think that's, not exclusive to founders too, right? It's everyone, right? Whether you're working a corporate job, whether you're taking care of family, whether you are training for a triathlon, right? Like there's always kind of ways how we prioritize what we need to do. And I guess to answer your question, how do I balance that between the different businesses while still focusing on the growth? It's really tough because I think a lot of times your mind gets kind of distracted by that shiny object and
mm-hmm.
you want to even we still have some escape rooms, they still have other businesses too. It's like you want to be able to if someone says hey like it would be really cool if this feature existed for Roamly, right? Or like oh like
Mm-hmm.
have thought about adding more speakers on this side And of course, we take all feedback, seriously. But I think you also like start to look at weighting when you build that product roadmap for whatever you do. You start to weight a lot of the user feedback, right? Is this coming from a user that's very active and spends 4 or 5 hours, a day on the app, right? Versus someone who's using it once a year or once a month. Both very valuable pieces, right? But it's going to really dictate what you decide to build because certain people are going to get more value out of it, or it's going to add more value to the community or group as a whole. And so that's kind of the framework that I use is like when we do our CSAT or NPS surveys, right? When we collect that feedback constantly from current customers and speaking to new ones, what are the things that people are most looking for? And we also use a very cool tool called Nexus. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
cool tool called Nexus, where it helps measure what are founders searching for, right? Is it go to market help? Is it sales help? Is it fundraising? And we're able to kind of look and build programming and bring on speakers that kind of relate to that. So it's tough. I try to segment my days instead of doing like five different pieces of work on five different companies. Maybe this day is specific to company A or company B, but without neglecting that. Because to your point, I can't go to sleep at the end of the night unless I have a zero inbox. So like you
Mm-hmm.
still have to kind of clean all that up. And, that's just kind of part of prioritizing or trying to spend the time a little more efficiently.
Right. Yeah. And I also do that because I have two agencies as well. So the first one I launched in 2020 and then I added another one in 2023. Although the first company is kind of like my main source of, income right
Hmm.
now. It's the revenue generating at the moment. I mean, the second company also generates revenue, but because it's small, it's not as much as the first company,
Sure,
right?
sure.
So I also try to segment my week, like Mondays this for this company, and sometimes I only spend like just one day for the new company and 4 days for the rest of the week for my first company. And I also delegate as much as I can, because I have a lot of ideas in my brain, and I, as much as I can, I try to put them in Notion, and all
Hmm.
of those ideas and all of those tasks, um, I think 50% of them I delegate them to my team members. So, is
Okay.
that something that you do as well? Like you delegate to your team? Because I know you mentioned about, maybe you can hire like somebody like a product manager or something and hope that they will do their job.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it's super important. I think a lot of founders, it's tough to know when to step back and when to kind of relinquish. I won't say control, but like we're not experts at everything we do, right? But as founders, we're kind of forced to do a little bit of everything
Right.
just from the nature of, hey, like we can afford ourselves, but we can't afford right a $200,000 salary or so on and so forth. And so at a certain point, it becomes all right. I'm doing something well or serviceable. Maybe it's social media marketing. Maybe it's content, whatever. Would it be better, right? Is it gotten to the point where now this brings in tens of thousands of dollars a month? Where yeah, we can bring on a full-time content manager, someone to replace that. It'll eat into our margins a little bit, but right, it frees up to me or whoever to spend more time on growing the other parts of the business. And that's something that myself and my co-founders have always kind of constantly battled with, right? How do we kind of delegate time and whatever of the 60, 70, 80 hours a week that we spend on all the projects, how do we pick which ones to move in like a very consistent manner? So still something that we kind of work through every day and I think that a lot
Yeah.
of founders are kind of struggling with, but I think that it's probably the most if not the second most important thing that as you start kind of hitting that growth or like traction side of things to just know, all right, what these are the benchmarks that I'm going to use to then pass the baton.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that you have a 15-month-old daughter, right?
Yes, yep,
Um
daughter, yeah.
so I've talked to so many moms here, at my podcast, and also, I have a lot of mom friends as well. But I've never really had a chance to talk to a dad entrepreneur and ask them how do they balance their time between their business and family. So how do you do that with your 15-month-old? That baby is still kind of clingy to her parents, right? Unless she's, I think most babies they're more clingy to their mom. than their
Oh yeah,
dads,
and
right?
I was gonna. There's different stages, right? I guess like there's always different points of it, and yeah, and it's like all credit goes to my wife for certainly carrying the load of that, and
Right.
I think it's always, and we got lucky because I think a lot of like I think from like maybe 3 4 months on was sleeping like 12 hours all through the night from like 7 p.m. until like 8 a.m. And so I think sleep is one of the probably the biggest driving factor, and I'm sure if we're lucky enough to have a second or whatnot, that always adjusts. But I think it's just like how do you balance, right? Yeah, like focusing for most founders, right? Their business is their baby too in many ways. And so it's like you can't neglect that, nor certainly can you neglect your child. And
Right.
so finding time to still, of course, be there for the big moments and working essentially from home right full time, even though I don't get to necessarily be there for every meal or every feeding or playtime, things like that. You still get to be present, right, and kind of take those little breaks between meetings and be present with your family and my daughter, and at the same time that gives me a lot of refresh for these types of conversations and other calls where I know a lot of founders that just are right back to back, like
Mm-hmm.
10 hours a day, 30-minute call, 15-minute call, 30-minute call, like so on and so forth. And if you're that busy, that's totally fine. But I think at a certain point, like it's just like anything, right? When you cram for an exam back in college or undergrad, like it's better if you just study throughout the whole semester versus just having to cram everything into the last second. And so I think if you could find ways to balance your schedule out, it'll still make sure that you can prioritize time, for your family and everything else that matters as well.
Right, exactly. And you also mentioned that you work for corporate before you founded your company, which is Roamli, the first one.
Mhm.
So ever since you started the business, have you ever thought of going back to corporate?
No. And, I've definitely, I think it's a privilege in many ways for people to be able to be founders and entrepreneurs because there's so many different scenarios, right? Some right, some wrong, but it's like, again, maybe you were at the end of the day, right? We all have to, pay rent, pay a mortgage, put food on the table, put a roof over the heads and do these things. And most founders, right, for the first early years don't get a chance to pay themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or paying themselves very little. And it is tough to be able to walk away from a very comfortable salary, right, with benefits and things like that, and then kind of hunt for yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that the transition is difficult for certainly a lot of people, right? You have to have a really good structure in place, like where my wife was also working full time. So she was able to help with that. We had a lot of other investments and other businesses that helped kind of carry the weight from the income side of it. But again, it's like most founders will probably see it, right? That make that transition. You're working a lot harder, a lot more hours for a lot less pay, right? Or a lot less
Right.
income.
Yeah.
Um, and it's always in the hope that eventually that will shift, right? And that pays off, whether it's 5, 10, 20 years down the road. But at the very least, right, it's very fulfilling. And through the
Mm-hmm.
corporate jobs I worked at, met a lot of amazing people. I would argue that the work was very fulfilling for me too,
Mm-hmm.
but just something that I think a lot of founders, for whatever reason, maybe it's financial freedom, maybe it's freedom of time, freedom to travel, whatever it is, they kind of make that move to entrepreneurship. And that's why so few end up going back because it's tough to give that up once you taste it, even for, a few months.
Right, yeah. And I think it's also the freedom of not having to answer to anybody. You answer to yourself, although your customers, because although your clients and customers, they're kind of like your boss, but still it's not the same as having a corporate boss, right? You know that you have more freedom and flexibility by being a founder or entrepreneur.
Yeah, we all answer to someone exactly and at the end of the day. And so I would much rather answer to people that, rely on, and again, if you have a good service, a good product that you feel comfortable with the value, then that should be the easiest thing in the world, right? Because then you're just constantly wanting to improve the value on that and make your customers and clients even happier. And if that's not how you feel, then maybe I get it, right? If being an entrepreneur founder is not for everybody. So it's kind of tough you just how does that balance in your personal priorities as a founder?
Right, exactly. And would you give us like a few examples of how you work smarter in your business and not harder? Because this podcast is pretty much, for ambitious entrepreneurs that are lazy, not literally lazy, but they want they don't want to hustle 24/7. They want to work smarter and achieve their goals as fast as they can without doing all the hard work, because they know that there are other options out there to achieve their goals more
Mhm.
efficiently. So how do you do that in your business currently?
Yeah, I think, and certainly the timing with everything, right? Like AI is certainly a massive piece of not just what I do, but I think everything from content to operations. And so a lot of it comes down to, I saw a really interesting article. I think it was with the Anthropic CEO, but it was talking about how different
Mm.
generations use AI, or how they use Claude and GPT-4 and things like that. And so you saw some of the older generation uses it more of like a search engine, kind of like they would use Google, right? How do I want a recipe for, a pizza or meatloaf or something like that. Millennials or Gen X are using a little bit more, not to say how it should be used, because you can use it for
Mm.
whatever you want, but more so like, hey, how do we use this to, whether it's agentic AI, how do we use this to automate operations? How do we use this to reduce the time it takes to spend writing content, not to completely replace it, right? But either generate some ideas and fill gaps, things like that. And then you saw, some of Gen Z, the younger generation uses it almost as like a personal therapist or friend, right? Like, hey, they'll upload a picture of their outfit. Hey, I'm,
Mm-hmm.
I'm wearing this out tonight, right? What do you think? Like, should I, is this too colorful? Is this whatever? And so there's so many different use cases of how people use AI. Again, none of them are necessarily wrong to my knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
but I think how founders and how we use it for specific to Roamli and Gilder has always been, what are some very manual tasks, right? Not necessarily, it could be data entry, it could just be things that, in this kind of hustle culture of working 100 plus hours a week, you don't have to do that anymore, right? It's always, I think, been work smarter, not harder. But a lot of these other, podcasts and shows always kind of highlight like the grind of you have to work this hard. And you certainly do have to work hard, right? I'm not saying,
Right.
but I think at the end of the day, it's like people are doing this for so many different reasons because, like you said, right, to answer to yourself, to have financial freedom, time freedom. And so really like Zapier AI, or a lot of those
Mm-hmm.
agentic tools, I think that's kind of saved us some of the most time. And then also just like really cutting out internal meetings, right? Just kind of cutting out a lot of, it's like, I forgot the name of the app, but there's one that it would sync to your Zoom or your calendar, and it just shows like based on the people that are attending that meeting, this is the cost of having that meeting. So you've
Oh,
got like
wow.
10 internal stakeholders, right? Here's like the VP who makes 200,000. Here's the analyst who makes 100,000, whatever. And by having this 45-minute meeting, it's going to cost the company $8,000. And so is there
Is
really
it
a need?
motion or is it different? Motion?
Could maybe could be, yeah. I
Yeah.
I haven't personally used it, but I've talked to a lot of founders who have. And especially when you have small 20-person teams or companies where, again, maybe the founders aren't paying themselves a lot, but everyone's time is so valuable, we try to cut down the number of internal meetings so that way we can just either be heads down on work, or even if it's just saving mental space to focus on other projects.
I love that. You know, if you're in the business and you're not using AI, you're missing out on a lot of good things, right? I mean, AI, I think it's good for business. Can it be bad? I think so too. It just really depends on how you utilize it. But for the most part, personally, I use a lot of AI tools to help me run my business. And I'm actually the one kind of like the head of our marketing right now. So I
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of competitor research and also
Mm-hmm.
marketing research and strategies. And AI has helped me a lot, especially now that there's deep research, on Gemini
Mm-hmm.
and Chat GPT. If I feel like if I was the one researching on a specific topic, kind of like today, because I'm running ads for my agency. And I was like
Mm-hmm.
wondering, okay, how can I get more social proof on my video? Because right now, when you see an ad on Facebook and there's like 100 comments, it it's kind of like hypnotizing you to also go click on that ad and read through the comments, right?
Yeah, like, are
And
these
you're
bots, are these real people? What are they
yeah, and
saying,
and,
right?
and you're kind of like, okay, well, maybe this is a good company because a lot of people are commenting and sharing this post, right? They may be bought, but there's that, I don't know the term to use, but when you see that, there's that social proof and
Yeah.
credibility, right? And so I asked Gemini to do some research for me, like what do other marketing agencies do to get social proof on their Facebook ad? And it took probably 20 to 30 minutes to research different websites, different
Hmm.
blogs, including Reddit and Twitter. And I feel like if I was the one doing that, it probably take me like hours, and I may not even be able to look at some of the information that it was able to look into, because it could
Right,
really
right.
dig deep into other companies, which is also kind of scary but helpful for most of us. So yeah, I mean, I think AI is a very good tool for us lazy entrepreneurs who want to work smarter.
100%. And it's never going to be it's always going to be controversial, right? But I think it's like the way that you use it as a way to supplement some of the human tasks you're doing versus, replacing things entirely. Then I think it's very easy to notice, like when people use AI, content for their blogs, and like
Mhm.
100% of AI, and like it's, people are smart, people notice, and like I'm not going to engage with that, or like the algorithm, like through LinkedIn and Google, they're not going to push it. And
Yes.
so it's, again, it's just like you can be like, the people that use it the right way are the ones that are going to continue to win. And there's no right, you can use it the wrong way as long as you're continuing to learn and realize this isn't like the end game, right? I still need to
Yeah.
evolve, change this, because like this is, I think, one of my mentors, Diana Stepner, she basically said, this is, today is the worst day for AI, right? It's only going to get better and better and better. And the longer you wait in not adapting to it, or even spending some time to really learn what, Sora or any of these other
Mm.
tools are doing, then the further behind you're going to get. So I absolutely agree with your sentiment. And I think that's a very, you probably talked, a lot of your founders, I'm sure, kind of share the same answer when they say AI. But it's like, again, how are you just using it to write a blog post? Are you just using it to write something else? Like, yes, those are time savings, but they can go so much deeper than that, right? And that's what
Right.
I
Yeah.
like every founder to try to do.
Yeah. I love what you said, that AI is not really sort of like a shortcut to success, right? You can use it to
Mhm.
give you ideas, but use it as a tool to kind of enhance what you already have. And sometimes it gives you confidence as well, when you know that, oh, okay, other people are doing this as well, so I'm not really alone.
Mhm.
And AI can confirm that for you as well. So as we wrap up, what is your lazy entrepreneur tip to our listeners?
Lazy entrepreneur tip. So I would say, you don't, whatever other podcasts or blogs or things like that, right? It's like, don't feel like you have to work 100 hours a week, right, to be successful. That being said, right, you shouldn't be like, your goal shouldn't necessarily be, I want to be, the most successful with only working 1 hour, because like, of course that would be great, right? I would love if
Mhm.
someone just handed me the keys to the kingdom or something like that. It's like everything that we do as a corporate employee, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, is rooted by how much time and how much effort we put into things. And that being said, right, just like aimlessly typing and cranking out spreadsheets and work for 100 hours a week is a means to an end, right? That's not going to be the be all solution. So podcasts like this, right, and other founders that kind of share those resources are super helpful. And so, as I kind of say it, is like, find what works for you to be the most effective, right? And just double down on that. If you feel like, hey, I'm getting the most done at 40 hours a week because the other hours between bed, I'm going on bike rides, right? I'm spending time with family, I'm playing with my dog, whatever it is. And that's what keeps you sane and happy and like functioning for the core 40 hours. Do that. And if you feel like you can be successful doing 100 hours of work, then great, right? The difference really just comes to like that kind of A level, B level, and C level tier of work, right? Like I work best typically at night, and so I'll usually, not like I'm doing like hard project work every night until midnight.
Mhm.
But it's like fine when you do your A level work, right? For a lot of like CEOs, they kind of, for them, that's the morning, right? Right when they wake up, they'll meditate and they'll kind of schedule their big meetings then, and then kind of let it wane out. But segment your time into A, B, C tiers, And then as a result, you can kind of slot your projects or more important or less important calls into those tiers. That would kind of be my lazy entrepreneur tip.
I love that. It's just all about intentionality, right? Sometimes when we work less, we feel guilty that we're working less because we see other people working more
Mm-hmm.
hours. And sometimes when you work more hours, you feel also guilty because you see other people work less than you and you're like starting to question yourself, am I doing the right thing?
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of how many hours you work, really if you know that you are being intentional and you know that you're working smart, and you're not giving yourself a hard time to be successful in business. Because to be honest, there are people out there, entrepreneurs, business owners who are also kind of hard headed and stubborn, right?
Of
They
course.
think that what what they're doing is the only right way. But there's a lot of ways we can do now on how to become successful, especially if you are an ambitious entrepreneur. And I know you're surrounded with a lot of ambitious founders, and I feel like you are an ambitious person as well. Like if you're too
Thank you.
ambitious and you have a lot of ideas and you have a lot of business, there is no way but to either delegate, automate, or eliminate some of the things that is not necessary in your business. So,
Mm-hmm.
my last question for you is what question would you like to ask my next guest? Which I don't know who my next guest is yet. So, this is going to
Mm.
be a surprise for them.
Okay, good. And it's actually something, so you gave me a little time to kind of prep and think this through. And it actually kind of relates to a post I made early on LinkedIn today. But for me, it's so we just got back from vacation. And it's for so many of us, we're always thinking about whether, again, that's not necessarily if you're a founder, right? If you're a individual contributor or manager, whatever, like we always find ourselves thinking about work in one way or the other, right? Even when we're on vacation, if we're taking time off. Um, and I don't know if that's because it's rooted in our brain of like how of what we do, right? Of what that kind of like consumes most of our time throughout the week. But like my question for the next guest would be, what are some tips or how are you kind of separating that? Because for me, it was never about completely decompressing or like completely stepping away and like the hard screen blackout, but it's like, how do you kind of balance that on time off, right? Because we are thinking about, right, founders thinking about their businesses and their customers when they're, waking up in the morning, when they're getting ready for bed, when they're at dinner, when they're with family, right? And inevitably that's not super healthy, but it's just kind of what we do. So how do you, as a founder for your next guest, find ways to separate that, right, and be able to truly, I don't want to say relax, right, but truly find that like peace to be able to just be in the moment.
I love that. Thank you for that question. And I will let you know once we have an answer for you. So,
Sounds great.
yeah. So, Brian, where can people find you online?
Yeah, feel free. I'm on LinkedIn, of course, and so feel free to reach out to me there. I'll give Christy my other contact, their email. So if you ever want to reach out, feel free to message me. And excited to chat. Just shop or life or anything with any other founders. Right? I think everyone's going through it together. We're all facing a lot of similar problems. So anything that I can do to help or that I can pick up as to learn right from you all, that's certainly always valuable for me. So anyway, through there is great.
Love it. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you, Christy. It was fun. Appreciate it.